Grandma always made her birthday a production, but this year she took it to another level. Everyone thought it was just her 82nd, but she had something else planned. I was 32, working as a project manager in Raleigh, North Carolina, and I knew family gatherings were never simple. We had the type of extended clan where cousins compared paychecks, aunts whispered about each other's kitchens, and uncles argued about politics before dessert. Still, my grandmother was the glue. She hosted every holiday, every barbecue, every reunion, and somehow kept us orbiting her. That's why when the invitation came with actual RSVP cards, something she'd never done before, we all felt the weight of it. She rented out the back room of a popular steakhouse downtown. When I walked in, I could tell she'd been planning this for months. Balloons matched the tablecloths, framed photos of her lined the walls, and she was holding court at the head table in a purple dress that sparkled under the lights. The air buzzed with the usual mix of laughter, chatter, and the clink of glasses. But even then, I sensed something was off. Grandma wasn't just soaking it in. She had that look she wore when she was about to deliver a punchline none of us were ready for. You probably know that feeling, when someone older than you seems to hold all the cards, like they've already decided what role you're about to play. That's what I felt as I sat down next to my cousin Erin. She leaned in and whispered, "Grandma's got a surprise later." Mom overheard her talking about paperwork. Paperwork? At a birthday party. I brushed it off, figuring Erin's mom had misunderstood. Still, throughout the appetizers, I couldn't shake the way Grandma kept glancing at a leather folder propped up against her chair. She'd laugh at a joke, then tap the folder with her hand, as if making sure it was still there. It wasn't until the cake came out, and the waitstaff dimmed the lights for the song, that I realized the night wasn't going to end like any other family gathering. She let us finish singing, blew out her candles, and then stood. "Thank you for being here," she said, her voice steady, eyes scanning the room. "But before anyone leaves, I've got some business to settle." That's when she reached for the folder. The room went quiet in a way I had never seen at one of our family events. Usually, even when someone made a toast, there was background chatter and clinking glasses. But the moment Grandma held up that folder, every sound died. She had the same authority she used to have when we were kids, and she'd call us all to line up for dinner. She opened the folder slowly, making sure everyone's eyes stayed on her. "I've made some changes," she said, and her tone wasn't casual. "And I want everyone to hear it at the same time." Erin's fork slipped against her plate. My Uncle Larry cleared his throat. Nobody else moved. Now, in most families, the will is something whispered about in private, behind closed doors, and years before it ever matters. But my grandmother didn't believe in leaving room for speculation. She was always direct, sometimes to a fault. This time, though, she was making a point. She wanted no arguments later. She pulled out several sheets of paper, stacked neatly, and laid them on the table in front of her. "This is my will," she said flatly. "I've rewritten it." My mom's eyes widened. One of my cousins muttered, "Oh my God," under their breath. Here's the thing about wills. They don't just decide where money goes. They expose the truth about what people mean to each other. And you know this as well as I do. When someone puts it in writing, it's harder to deny. It's not about the dollar amount. It's about recognition, about where you stand in the story of someone's life. That's what makes them so explosive. I could see people bracing themselves. The property she owned, the savings she had, the jewelry passed down from her mother. Everyone knew it added up. But the bigger weight was sentimental. Grandma had always said she'd divide things fairly. That night, though, she looked like she was about to drop a hammer. She flipped through the pages, then looked up and smiled faintly. "I figured the best gift I could give you all this year was clarity." The words hung in the air, heavy and sharp. I felt my chest tighten, waiting to see whose name she would call first. Grandma didn't drag it out. She read the first part as if she were reciting a grocery list. "The house will not be sold," she said. "It will go to Erin." My cousin's head jerked up, eyes wide. Erin lived 2 states away, rarely came back except for holidays. And yet here, she was suddenly being handed the family home. I glanced at my mom, who looked like someone had just pulled the rug from under her. Next came the bank accounts. "I've consolidated everything," Grandma went on, "and split it into 3 portions. One for Larry, one for Denise, one for Carl." That covered her children, my uncles and my mom. Fair enough on paper, but the room was tense, like everyone was trying to do silent math in their heads. Then came the personal effects, the things everyone cared about most. The quilt her mother had sewn by hand, the old silverware from her wedding, the pearl necklace she'd worn in every family portrait. One by one, she assigned them, and not always in ways that made sense to the rest of us. The necklace went to a cousin she rarely spoke to. The quilt, surprisingly, went to me. I hadn't expected anything, so when she said my name, I felt every pair of eyes shift toward me, measuring whether I deserved it. You know the look, when people don't say anything but their silence tells you they think it should have been theirs. That's what I felt in that moment. It wasn't about the quilt. It was about the message underneath. Grandma wasn't dividing things evenly. She was making a statement with each choice. By the time she finished, the room had split into camps. Some looked relieved, others blindsided. My Uncle Larry leaned back with his arms crossed, his jaw tight. Erin still hadn't touched her drink, her face pale. My mom just kept forcing a smile, the way she did when she wanted to seem gracious even if her stomach was turning. Grandma closed the folder and said, "There will be no debates. I wanted you all to hear it from me, not from a lawyer." She set the papers down like it was final. And in that silence that followed, I realized she hadn't just redrawn her will. She had redrawn the family map. No one rushed to speak. It was as if the weight of her words pressed down on every fork, every glass, every breath in that room. Grandma sat back in her chair, calm as ever, sipping from her water like she had just finished reading the specials off a menu. The rest of us were frozen, trying to make sense of what had just been dropped on us. It's strange how money and heirlooms reveal truths that everyday conversation hides. People can pretend to be above it, but when lines are drawn in ink, you see who feels favored, who feels forgotten. You might think you wouldn't care, but if your name got skipped, if a cousin suddenly got the thing you thought was meant for you, it stings deeper than you'd expect. That sting was thick in the air. Erin finally broke the silence. "The house?" Her voice cracked a little. "Are you sure, Grandma?" She wasn't rejecting it. She was stunned, maybe even scared. Owning a family house wasn't just an asset. It was a responsibility, with memories packed into every room. And Erin, of all people, had the weakest ties to it. My mom's face showed what she didn't say. That was supposed to be mine. Grandma didn't flinch. "Yes, the house is yours. You'll take care of it." She said it with finality, as if the decision had been sealed years ago. That was her style. She never explained herself when she thought she was right. I leaned back in my chair, feeling the quilt's name still lingering on me. Why me? I had no explanation. I wasn't the closest grandchild. I visited a few times a year, called when I could, but somehow she chose me for something so personal, and that choice, small as it seemed, shifted how I sat at that table. Suddenly, I wasn't invisible anymore. Around me, though, the energy changed. Cousins looked down at their plates, some avoiding eye contact, others glancing between each other like they were recalculating their places in this family hierarchy. Grandma had said there would be no debates, but you could see the arguments forming silently in everyone's heads. And just as the tension seemed unbearable, Grandma smiled faintly and said, "Now who's ready for cake?" The waitstaff, probably oblivious to what had just happened, rolled the cake back out and set it in front of her again. The candles were already blown out, so it looked a little sad sitting there, untouched. Still, people clapped weakly, like they were trying to reset the mood. But you can't just sweep something like that under a rug made of frosting and sprinkles. Grandma cut neat slices and handed them out one by one, as if nothing unusual had been said. She chatted with the waitress, asked about the bill, even complimented the balloons. Meanwhile, everyone else sat there chewing in silence. It was the quietest birthday cake I've ever eaten. Here's the thing. When a family is confronted with unexpected news, there are always two reactions. Some retreat, thinking silence will keep the peace. Others lean forward, unable to stop themselves from poking the wound. That night, my Uncle Larry was the latter. He cleared his throat and said, "Mom, don't you think this should have been discussed with us first?" Grandma didn't even look up. "No, I thought it should be decided by me, not argued by you." She kept eating her cake. The finality in her voice was sharper than the knife she used to slice dessert. Larry pressed his lips together, clearly holding back. My mom reached over and touched his arm, silently begging him not to start a fight in public. Erin still looked dazed, as if she'd just been handed a burden she hadn't asked for. I wanted to say something, maybe lighten the mood, but the truth is I didn't know what to feel myself. Having the quilt meant more than I'd admitted. It was proof that she saw me in some specific way. But why me? You've probably had a moment where you suddenly realize someone's choices are about more than fairness. They're about sending a message. That's what Grandma had done. Every gift was a signal, every omission a statement. And as I sat there with my fork, pretending to enjoy the cake, I realized this wasn't just about inheritance. She was trying to shape what would happen to us after she was gone. And whether it worked or not would depend on how each of us reacted in the days ahead. When the plates were cleared, the party began to splinter. Some relatives left early, muttering excuses about long drives or early mornings. Others lingered, hovering in small clusters, whispering in low tones. I stayed seated, watching it all unfold like a scene I wasn't fully part of. Grandma, on the other hand, looked relaxed, almost satisfied, like she had crossed something important off her list. As we walked out into the cool night air, Erin caught up with me. "Did you know?" she asked, eyes still wide. I shook my head. "No clue." She didn't say a word to me. Erin bit her lip, glancing back toward the restaurant. "I don't even want the house. What am I supposed to do with it?" I didn't have an answer. That house wasn't just bricks and wood. It was holiday dinners, scraped knees on the front porch, and the faint smell of Grandma's cooking that never seemed to fade from the walls. Letting it go would feel like tearing out the root of the family tree. Driving home, I thought about the quilt. It sat folded on Grandma's couch most of my life, a simple patchwork of faded blues and reds. I'd never even commented on it. Why would she give it to me? Out of all the cousins, some of whom spent more time with her, why me? The question kept circling. You probably know this feeling too, being singled out for something you didn't expect, and suddenly it changes how you see yourself. Part of me felt honored, but another part worried it would spark resentment. Family has a way of turning meaning into competition. The next morning, my phone lit up with texts. My Uncle Larry was furious. My mom was trying to smooth things over, sending messages about focusing on the good memories. Erin wrote that her husband was already stressing about what keeping the house would mean. The will had been revealed less than 12 hours ago, and already it was unraveling the family dynamics. And deep down, I had the sinking feeling Grandma knew exactly that would happen. By Sunday afternoon, the calls started. My mom rang first, her voice strained. "She blindsided us," she said. "I can't believe she'd hand the house to Erin. Your uncle is fuming." I could hear pots clattering in the background, the sound of her trying to distract herself with chores. "Just don't get pulled into it," she added quickly, like she knew a storm was brewing. Later, Uncle Larry called me directly. That was unusual. He rarely reached out unless it was about football or holiday plans. "Listen," he said, skipping any greeting. "You're smart enough to see this isn't fair. You and I both know Erin's not cut out for handling that house. She'll sell it the first chance she gets. That's not what Mom would have wanted." His voice carried that edge people get when they're sure they're right. I didn't argue. I just listened, because underneath his words, I could hear what he really meant. It should have been mine. And maybe part of him believed fighting for the house was noble, that he was protecting a legacy. But you know how it goes. Sometimes what looks like principle is really just pride dressed up in better clothes. Meanwhile, the cousins had their own group chat going, and the messages were blunt. Some were annoyed about being left out, others suspicious about why certain people got what they did. My name came up more than once, always in connection with the quilt. It seemed trivial compared to the house or the money, yet it carried a weight that made people question Grandma's motives. That's the thing about inheritances. They're never just about objects. They're mirrors. They reflect who people think they are in someone else's eyes. If you're skipped over, it feels like being erased. If you're chosen, it can feel like a responsibility you didn't ask for. By the end of the day, I realized the family wasn't waiting for Grandma to pass to start fighting. The fight had already begun. And in the middle of it, she sat in her chair at home, probably drinking her tea, knowing full well she had set it all in motion. A few days later, I stopped by Grandma's house to return a serving platter she'd loaned my mom. When she opened the door, she looked unbothered, as if the birthday party hadn't caused a family-wide tremor. The quilt was draped neatly over the back of the couch, exactly where I'd always seen it, like she was daring me to acknowledge it. We sat in the living room, and after some small talk about the weather and traffic, I finally asked, "Why me?" I didn't specify what I meant. I didn't need to. She smiled, the kind of smile that wasn't for show, but for herself. "Because you'll understand it's not just fabric," she said. "It's memory. It's care. You don't brag, you don't grab. You'll just keep it safe." Her answer was simple, but it landed heavier than I expected. I thought of my cousins, some of them angling for bigger pieces, louder about their disappointments. And here was Grandma, giving me something quiet, not valuable on paper, but invaluable in her eyes. She leaned forward, lowering her voice. "The house was the hardest choice. Erin doesn't know what she's in for, but that's the point. She needs roots, and your uncle needs to learn the world doesn't revolve around him." She said it without malice, just with certainty, as if she'd been playing this strategy for years. It struck me then, this wasn't just a distribution of assets. It was her final attempt at shaping the family's future. She wasn't waiting for death to dictate it. She was alive, orchestrating the play, while she could still watch the reactions unfold. Walking out of her house that evening, quilt folded under my arm, I understood something I hadn't before. She didn't rewrite her will because she was afraid of dying. She rewrote it because she was still very much alive, and determined to leave her mark in a way none of us could ignore. But if she thought her choices would pull us together, she underestimated how deeply old rivalries ran, because by the end of that week, the quiet grumbling turned into actual plans for a family meeting, and I had no idea what would come out of that room. The family meeting ended up being set for Saturday at my mom's house. The irony wasn't lost on me. She hadn't inherited the house, but she was still expected to host the gathering where everyone would argue about it. By the time I arrived, cars lined the street. Inside, the air was thick, not with the smell of food like usual, but with tension. Uncle Larry was already pacing near the fireplace, arms crossed. Erin sat on the couch, twisting a napkin in her hands, looking like she'd rather be anywhere else. The cousins huddled in corners, whispering, their eyes darting toward me when I walked in. I took a seat by the window, the quilt folded neatly on my lap, not to flaunt it, but because I knew if I left it at home, people would accuse me of hiding it. The conversation started civil. My mom tried to keep the peace, reminding everyone that Grandma was still alive and capable of making her own choices. But it didn't take long for Larry to cut in. "Capable or not, this isn't fair," he said flatly. "She gave the house to someone who doesn't even live here. She split the money without asking. And as for the rest..." His eyes flicked to the quilt in my lap, and I felt the room stiffen. You ever notice how a group can turn on you even if no one says it outright? That's how it felt, like invisible fingers were pointing my way, questioning why I had been chosen for something they considered symbolic. I stayed quiet, because I knew nothing I said would ease that resentment. Erin finally spoke, her voice shaky. "I don't want the house. I can't handle it. If anyone else wants it, take it, please." She looked desperate, almost pleading. But instead of calming the room, her words lit the fuse. Suddenly, cousins began offering opinions, Larry pushing his claim, others suggesting sales and buyouts. And through all of it, I sat there with the quilt, realizing this wasn't really about property. It was about control. Grandma had made her choices, but the family wanted to renegotiate them in her absence. That's when it hit me. She had predicted this exact scene, and maybe, in her own sharp way, she wanted us to wrestle with it before she was gone. Because once she wasn't here to watch, the gloves would really come off. The meeting stretched for hours, circling the same arguments over and over. Voices rose, tempers flared, and then sank back into uneasy silence. By the time the sun dipped low, it was clear no one was leaving with an agreement. Erin still didn't want the house. Larry still insisted it belonged to him, and my mom kept trying to mediate, though her patience was wearing thin. I stayed quiet most of the time. I wasn't the type to jump into shouting matches, and besides, what could I say? The quilt in my lap had become heavier by the hour, not because of its fabric, but because of the meaning people attached to it. I finally set it aside on the chair next to me, but even then, I felt eyes tracking it like it was a trophy in plain sight. Eventually, people began drifting out, muttering about figuring this out later. Erin gave me a quick hug before she left, whispering, "I don't know what to do." Larry stormed out without a word. My mom sat down heavily beside me once the door closed. "This isn't going to end anytime soon," she said, rubbing her temples. On the drive home, I thought about Grandma, sitting in her chair just a few blocks away, probably watching TV with a cup of tea. She had stirred the pot and then stepped back, leaving us to deal with the fallout. Some people would call it manipulative, but I started to see it differently. She wasn't trying to punish us. She was trying to make us face ourselves. You know that truth we all avoid in families, that the fights aren't really about the objects? They're about recognition, about who mattered most. Grandma had known that. She used the will as a mirror, forcing each of us to confront what we believed we were owed, and why. The weeks that followed were messy. Lawyers got mentioned, emotions ran hot, and holiday plans were uncertain. But through it all, I kept the quilt. I didn't flaunt it, didn't explain it. I just folded it at the end of my bed. Some nights, I catch myself staring at it, realizing that in her own blunt way, Grandma had given me more than fabric. She'd given me a reminder that families are shaped not by what we inherit, but by how we handle what's left behind. And that, whether we liked it or not, was the real legacy she had chosen for us.